Hi, everybody. Welcome to this episode of A Guy with a Scarf. I have the pleasure to have with me someone that, for me, is connected to the Olympics. And this is part of my mini-series about the Olympics, Alex Balfour. We did a bit of work together at London 2012. He did a lot more than I did because he was involved fully, but I let Alex introduce himself.
Hi, Carlo. Nice to see you. So, Alex, I'm now co-founder of a business called Generate Digital, and we focus on making money out of digital for sports and entertainment clients. But when you and I first met, it was just making digital work at all was the issue. And back then,
True.
actually, I was. It wasn't even digital. I was head of new media for the London Organising Committee of the Olympic and Paralympic Games, to give it its full title. And I remember discussing with my then boss, Jackie Brock Doyle, who's now at World Athletics and beyond,
Yeah.
and saying to her, could my title be head of digital? And she said, no, the TV people wouldn't like that. So I was recruited as head of new media and remained as head of new media from 2007 to 2012. But we don't talk about it as new media anymore. It's very much media or digital.
Absolutely. And so how do you think, because London 2012 was definitely kind of pivotal moment. One, because I think against some expectation, it was amazing for London. Everybody was scared. Now, a city like London, you put the Olympics, whatever happened. I was there a lot, and it was an amazing time to be in London, to be honest. On the other hand, I think we collectively as an industry did really, and every Olympic Games, there is new things, but I think many people remember London 2012 kind of a milestone, but again, maybe it's my perspective, but I don't know if you, you may have shared because you have vested interest, but I think it was. And how do you think things have changed from, then to 12 years later, Paris now, 1 month from now?
Yeah, I think, I mean, clearly, addressing your last question first, your last point first. Clearly, digital is now woven through the fabric of everybody's lives of all generations. It's not really a young person's consumption activity. Everybody has some degree of digital consumption going on or digital interaction going on in everything they do in their daily lives. So now it's a critical part of the consumer experience for an Olympic Games or any event, and that's the major difference. And obviously, the broadcasters also, who are still the most important partners in both publicising and funding games, they are fully digital in terms of their output, both their traditional live video, but also everything else they do is geared towards digital consumption, and it's critical now in a way that in 2012 it was extremely important, but it wasn't deemed critical. But I think just picking up your other thread around London. I mean, I think actually what was unique about our circumstance then, which has been hard to replicate since, are two or three different things that were part by design and part by luck and accident. I think one was that we were able to fund the games, at least the staging of the games, as is traditional in most games. There's funding for the staging and there's funding for the infrastructure, and funding for the staging as far as possible comes from private sources, which is sponsorship support from Olympic sponsors, because you have both domestic sponsors of the organising committees and then the international top sponsors, as they're known, of the Olympics, and other sources, and then there's government funding for the infrastructure. I think we were very fortunate in London. We worked very hard, obviously, to raise a sufficient amount of private funds to fund the state of the games. We were very fortunate that we had limited, although we had significant public money supporting infrastructure, we didn't have a lot of intervention from politics and politicians, and I think that's partly the way, perhaps partly a function of British culture, but also 10 years before had been a project run by the then government to build what they called at the time the Millennium Dome, now known as the O2, which is a huge venue in southeast London, and it was driven as a political project and then was seen as a bit of a disaster in the implementation. Not the infrastructure, which still exists now, and it's a huge venue, but politicians tried to get involved with putting on the show and made a mess of it, and therefore were much more shy about their ability to actually run stuff as opposed to facilitate it. So that was a really helpful context that the politicians wanted. They wanted to take the credit, but they didn't want to get involved in the day to day. And then I think the other thing was we had a brilliant leader in Paul Dighton, now Lord Dighton, who he actually came from Goldman Sachs on an operational organisation basis, but he was the ultimate in the leader who let people do things. He was a facilitator, not a big ego, and someone who was very sharp on detail, but he just made sure that everyone was doing their best jobs and had that opportunity. And I think that attitude ran through the whole organising committee, and it was really a blessing to be allowed to be doing things, albeit under scrutiny and challenge constantly, but it was permissive leadership which led to exceptional performance.
And 2012, I mean, just rethink where we were. So obviously, social media were there, definitely.
Yeah.
Not as we know today, but they were there. Mobile was in full explosion.
Although I think the starting point. So when I joined the organising committee in 2006, Facebook existed. I think Twitter hadn't quite launched. Instagram didn't launch for 2 or 3 years later. And certainly in the UK, broadband was still a fairly minority activity, and there was only one network that was meaningful on 3G. So actually, the transition that happened between 2006 and 2012, one part of it was people accessing the internet on their phones, and on touchscreen phones, because the iPhone didn't come until 2007. So though by the time we got to the games, around 50% of our web traffic, for example, was mobile. That wasn't something we were planning for 3 years before, or at least we were definitely planning, as you well know, mobile iterations of all of our products and services, but maybe it hadn't quite registered with us that was going to be effectively the majority use case, not the minority. So all those things we had in planning. It's just that by the time we'd rolled them out, both mobile and social were far more significant part of people's lives than they had been in the 6 years previously.
Yeah, and also, if you want, the website was the core of everything in one end, even if we had the mobile app and everything. And then we also, I was also with the BBC for all the streaming part, and that part has changed a lot more.
Yeah.
Even if I think we were doing super advanced stuff already.
Yeah, absolutely. Because there were there still are limited rights in the Olympic context for streaming for the organising committee, at least. Obviously, it's widely exploited by the broadcasters. That, as you know, differs from rights holder to rights holder about how much a rights holder can publish either on its own or in parallel. At one end extreme, you've got the NBA, who pushes everything as marketing, and then at other extremes, there are still rights holders who have little or no access to streaming video. But then it was still a minority activity to stream. There wasn't an awful lot of exciting activity going on in clipping and managing of highlights and clips, and it wasn't really till after 2012 that the capacity to use video on social networks, starting with Facebook and Instagram, and now obviously TikTok, that's really the primary use case for lots of social media is video, when then it was a nice to have add-on, but it wasn't considered essential, and therefore content wasn't really made with social in mind.
I was trying to visualize an organizer then and an organizer now. Clearly, the weight of website and social is super different.
Yeah,
completely. By the way, now since I did a lot of work with OCS on that. The website is now managed. I mean, it's replicated from. It's not independently done from the organizing committee, but is run from OCS, etc. So that's a very different scenario.
Yeah.
For that, and clearly, if you're an organizing committee, there's a lot more channels, whatever we want to call platform, on which you can and need to play.
Yeah.
So it's definitely, and the content is different, formats are different. The athletes, what do you think about the athletes? At the time, the athletes were kind of, I don't want to say non-existent, sorry, in terms of their own channels, because already I think 2012 they were but now it's very, and also the rules have changed, right?
Yeah, the rules have changed. There's a number of different things that have come in. It's interesting, as you said, at the time when you helped me build, websites and apps as the organising committee, we were entirely in charge of that brief. It created sort of interesting misalignment and sometimes tensions between us and the IOC. That's now changed. As you say, all that
Yeah,
work has gone centralised, which kind of makes sense, especially
I
for.
think that's it.
I mean, you guys as Delta Trade were the only people who really had a handle on how to convert the Olympic data feeds into something that you could consume through a website, and you were a critical partner. But now, it makes sense that the IOC should be in control of that end to end. That's the core data feed. And it
Yeah,
makes sense that there should be continuity in the Olympic website. It shouldn't
yeah,
have to be kind of rebuilt every 3 or 4 years, which I think became quite challenging, especially even for subsequent organising committees like Rio and Sochi before that,
yeah,
and,
yeah,
and
yeah,
so on. So it makes huge sense. But I think, yeah, the athlete positioning is really different and interesting. I mean, I think the fundamental the similarity with 2012 is that, as with other games, is that Olympic athletes are generally not household names, and so there's only a small minority who are super famous at the time they come into the games, and they often tend to be tennis players or
mm.
golfers. They're not athletes from what you'd think of as the core sports. But then, and so often, the games makes heroes of people who then go back into not being professional athletes afterwards because it's not the nature of their sports. However,
Yeah,
I entirely agree that there are lots of athletes now who, either in the run up to the games or because of the games, their individual profile raises and they have their own channel. So they will all obviously be active, as we all are, on social channels, but some of them can be very effective in using that. So I think in Tokyo, from memory, the number one profile athlete was Ilona Meyer, if I pronounced her name right, the USA rugby player, because she was just really strong on TikTok. So she certainly threw out
yeah,
some of the biggest numbers. And so, although she's a star, she wasn't the biggest of superstars. But her social opportunity and her social skills gave her profile. So that's definitely very different, and I think that's exciting. That's that gives the games a bit more accessibility, and it gives more opportunity. And alongside that, the IOC has recognised that there's now less constraints around what athletes can do in terms
yeah,
of the footage they can create, the visibility they can have for their sponsors, which has always been a tough one.
yeah.
So that's a big change. It's a big change.
No, so in parallel, maybe in terms of storytelling, the role of the artist is one. Maybe, and I'm trying to imagine what the impact will be on the games. The fact that in the last, sorry, I'm not a historiographer, so 5 years or 4,
Yes.
Netflix style sport documentaries have started to really become crucial for the development of some sports. And the Olympic Channel is doing something with Netflix, etc. Yannis touched a bit upon that before. I think this kind of deeper storytelling, which I think the sport needed. I mean, it was there. Nobody
Yeah.
was doing properly. Some movies, maybe some, locally, but that could be another, if you want, I don't want to say format, but storytelling changes in these last 12 years. There's now
Yeah.
a different way of telling those stories.
I
Maybe
agree.
more pre and post than during. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's clearly an opportunity, and there's clearly it's a lot. You know, None of these things are ever as cheap as people think they are, but it's still a lot.
No.
It's a lot more cost effective than it used to be. And I think there's lots of different formats, short, medium, and long, that are being tried out. And I totally agree with you. And I think what's interesting I think two things about the games and about multisport that I've learned working on different properties, not just the Olympics. Um, on the Olympics specifically, I do remember us having. So there was quite a late hire in the organising committee around brand, which sort of
Yeah.
neglected that area for a bit. Some of that was to do with some internal politics, but anyway, the guy who came in on that side, Greg Nugent, I remember him running a brand workshop and brought in, and which was a sort of worthy endeavor. And we had sort of 50, 60 people in the room from all across the business and some externals to talk about the Olympic brand and the London 2012 brand. And it became clear by the end of doing that for a couple of days that actually everyone had their own interpretation of what the Olympics meant to them. And it's probably best left that way rather than trying to say it has to be this way or that way. But all of it came down to storytelling. And the thing that grips everyone is storytelling, because of the type of stories, people's journey, the relatability of people from different cultures and backgrounds and genders that relate to
Yeah.
you individually because of all sorts of things. And there are just hundreds of thousands, literally, of stories because you have 15,000 athletes in every games, and that's the potential amazing difference for the Olympics. They're not all the same type of athlete, they're not all from the same background, and it's a super interesting space to explore. I also think that allied to that, but a hugely important part of particularly multi-sport big event games is actually what I think Yanis touched on it when he spoke with you a couple of weeks ago, is around emotional connection. And I think that's almost more important, frankly, than the sport and the results. I remember having a internal meeting. I was part of the wider communications team, and Seb Coe, who was our chair, was he actually sat in an office kind of on the edge of our department, so we saw a lot of him. And my boss, Jackie Brock Doyle, who I mentioned, she put together a session with Seb, kind of 9 months out, maybe around Christmas time before the games, to just talk about what was coming up and to think about it with someone who'd been there a few times on the track and off. And I asked Seb, just because I had an opportunity to ask a question, I said, what do you think the games will be remembered for? And he immediately said, atmosphere. And he was right, because actually, especially if you're in the country and go to the games, that's all of what it's about. And I'm increasingly convinced that people who go to these big events, even people with tickets, if you ask them all in a quick poll as they walk out who won and what was their time or their score, they probably wouldn't know. And it doesn't matter, because they still enjoyed it. Or they might say, oh, it was the guy or the girl who did that amazing celebration, or I remember this moment or that moment. And you'll say, yeah, that wasn't the winning moment, but they don't care, because it's all about that collective feel and that emotion. And I think that's what's special. And I think that's what, back to your point around athletes and platforms, that's increasingly what these different ways of telling stories can capture. Because you and I spent loads of times obsessing, aligning with results teams and international federations about how do we get this format right? How do we represent the score properly? But for a lot of people, although you cannot get that wrong, that's not the core to their experience. That's just a reason for the athletes to be there. It creates a pinnacle. It creates a function for the games. But actually, the joy that people get out of the games isn't about those details and whether they're wrong or they're right. It's about the collective emotion that those performances drive, and that's what people love about the games, and why it becomes something bigger than just a series of sports events.
One sentence that I used, and I wrote an article just after the 2008 Olympics, which were my first Olympic, was "There's nothing like the Olympics." And I meant it in terms of our job, which is bringing the Olympics to fans. Somehow it seems a bit a dumb sentence, but that's the reality. And I was thinking, is it easier, or is it a better experience today than it was, whatever, 12, 20 years ago? I think there's still nothing like the Olympic, and it's still extremely difficult to bring the Olympics to fans. It's like, the latest Mac if you compare it to 10 years ago Mac laptop, it's amazing. I still have the same waiting times. I still take the same time. The only advancement, but that could be another episode, is I now use a lot of AI tools, and certain things have become super, super fast. Otherwise, the experience, it's the same. I'm using the same tools, maybe a bit better, and I don't know if I'm not doing it this time, but if I had the responsibility of designing the fan engagement for the Olympics, is it easier to tell these stories? I don't think so. But again, my opinion. I want to hear yours.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think two things. One, in terms of, I think the one thing we did at London, which I am proud of with the team that I had, which of necessity that they're always smaller than you think, these teams. I think we had 6 people or maybe 8 people at max output, and then a lot of volunteers and others to help us during games time. But we did everything we could to use every possible surface or channel that was available to us, that we were permitted, and push the boundaries, frankly, as far as we could, to do everything on every platform. And that just took a lot of hard work. We could not have done that. We didn't have to do it, but we felt we were obliged to. We wanted to. It was fun too, but to do all those things is really tough, because there's just so much to cover in the time available, and even literally day to day with so many. It's your 26 World Championships and going on in parallel. So covering all that stuff was difficult, and we did some. We pushed the boundaries. and had some interesting run-ins around it. We built we were desperate to be as smart as we could with social. We built a Twitter medal table, or now would be an X medal table, which was politically awkward because we were informed at the time that the IOC doesn't really recognize medal tables, which is still, I think, maybe not quite the case that it was, but effectively, medal tables were considered to be invidious, and that's not something they would officially publish. But also the fact that it was a Twitter medal table, and Twitter couldn't be an official brand because they weren't a sponsor.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the end, we kind of pulled the trigger on it in spite of only getting maybe semi-authorization to do it. And then what was fun about it, on one level, it was inevitable, of course, that an unexpected country came out on top because the president of Mongolia at the time was a big Twitter user. So he got the whole of Mongolia behind it, and Mongolia came top of the Twitter medal table, judged by the most number of people who tweeted for their team. But also, we had a whole deployment of it, which was pretty advanced, in every single venue, which had a big screen, and that's most of them, to put up a graphic with the right Twitter hashtag for the teams competing in whatever they were competing in. And that was all lined up to go. I'm not even sure how we managed that, in every venue, for it to be switched on pre and during events. And then in the very first event, which was actually, as is usual, pre even the opening ceremony, when the football started, women's football, Hampden Park in Glasgow, the North Korean women went on. I even forget who they were playing, but someone put up a South Korean flag, so they all walked off and refused to compete for an hour. So then we just got the phone call saying, we're not putting any of your flags up, forget it. We're not putting any country stuff up on screen, so it had to be cut. So I know that, but that was kind of fun. But I think the challenge, and I think one of the difficulties I think that the games maybe will always have, is that there is so much that it delivers in terms of stuff happening. As I mentioned, 15,000 athletes. It's a huge event. When you think that, and as Yanis mentioned, the World Cup is 750 athletes, so it's just so much bigger than any other event in terms of logistics and venues and stuff going on. It's really hard to communicate that even through the lens of a screen, a TV, or a device, because you just can't get your head around the enormity of what it is. I think when if you're lucky enough, as you've been in a host city, especially one that you've been brought up in or know very well, you really understand the impact. But if you've never come across that, it's just a distant TV event that you maybe don't understand. And getting that across, it's a strength and a weakness, I think, of the Olympics, because it's enormous beyond understanding of any other event. But it's hard to see that when you're not in the place where it's taking part.
Yeah. And finally, just to wrap up, anything special your expectation for Paris 2024?
Yeah, I think, I'm very lucky to be involved in this cycle. As I mentioned, what we do now is around monetizing. I remember my old chief exec, again, Paul, asking me in the first few weeks of my job, saying, so, what's it actually for, all this stuff? And lots of graphs and numbers and engagements, but he really wanted to know what's it worth to me. And I finally started to solve that problem, to define what this stuff is worth in cash terms, and that's what I do. So, but I think one of the strong points of the games as an operating model is that it does go from venue to venue. It makes it really tough to deliver, but it gives it a new flavor and an impetus and a fresh perspective. So I'm not that close to the Paris organization, and I've heard people say it'll definitely be very French, which they say both positively and in terms of talent. So, but I think you don't know until it. I don't have and probably for me, I'm quite looking forward to the fact that I don't actually have a lot of visibility on exactly how the execution is going to be, because it'll be a very pleasant surprise when it comes. So, I think where the IOC has done a great job is in lining up the next 3 big venues for the summer games and indeed the winter games. I see they just sort of put preferred candidates on for the next 2 winter games too. All really strong venues, strong areas, countries that know how to get stuff done, and I think it'll only reinvigorate the franchise. So I'm excited to see what that's going to look like.
Yeah, va bene. So let's wait and watch amazing Olympic Games in a bit more than a month.
As always.
Okay, grazie Alex. Thank you.
Grazie.